All right, class, welcome back to BritLit 2 at El Paso Community College, English 2323. Now, last time we went over the course policies and calendar. I showed you the books. We're going to talk a little bit about the calendar today and where we are. I want to tell you, class, once again, we're in this situation where we're in this pandemic, we're in this crisis. Things will be moving in sort of a flow this semester. We'll do the best we can to keep up, et cetera, but things will change. And I'll let you know these changes sometimes as they happen, class. But right now, we need to talk about what we didn't talk about last time and a little bit about these different ways you're going to earn your grade. Once again, course requirements, you're going to have an oral presentation, which we're going to talk about, 20% of your grade that you're going to make. You're going to make that oral presentation, upload it to YouTube. I'll help you with that. I'll help you with all this stuff. You're going to write an epistolary paper, which we're going to talk about, 20% of your grade. There's going to be a poetry explication and analysis midterm for 20%. You're going to have a final essay for 20% of your grade, and then we'll work in that class participation grade, which we won't have, but it's going to be spread out, and I'll be redoing that in regards to these other grades. Because class, once again, I've never taught this class online before, but I'm teaching it now because I need to because of the crisis. So we'll take it one step at a time and realize that the situation that we're in. Now, so let's go to page 2, oral presentation. During the semester, each student will make a 15 to 20 minute oral presentation of the class on a writer that we will discuss during that period. And I'll be talking about this more in depth throughout the semester, but by saying during that period, we mean during that time that was allotted on the syllabus for that writer. The student's presentation might be limited to the writer's impact on history, cultural or literary trends in his or her period, or a comparison and contrasting to the major's author works and motives within and across periods. In addition, the student might choose to explain key elements of the lives and art of individual authors or analyze the works in their both historical and universal contexts, which I'll be explaining. Each presentation, however, will include a brief biography of the writer and will be graded partially on the effectiveness of the presentation. Although props aren't required, students are encouraged to use them if their presentation will benefit from them. All oral presentations will be approved ahead of time by the instructor during a one-on-one conference with the student. So class, we'll be setting up a situation where we'll be able to meet virtually. I'm working on that now, and we will have plenty of time to do that, but we'll do that. We'll be able to meet over Zoom or one of those platforms, and we'll be able to do that. So 15 to 20 minute presentation you will make. You will upload it once again to YouTube, and I will help you with that, and I will work with you in that situation to help you with that. Then a class that says an epistolary paper, which you will write for me. An epistolary paper is one written, and this is once again on page 2 in the syllabus, course policies and calendar, in the form of a letter, approximately 4 to 5 pages, typed double-spaced with a salutation. At least one quotation used in the body of the letter in the closing. The letter can be written to anyone you wish to discuss a particular work with. The author, character, another author, a teacher, sorry, class. Is that you, Patrick? Okay, your buddy's out front, I think. All right, I love you, son. Take care. Sorry about that, class. My son, the junior at El Paso High, is just taking off with one of his buddies. All right, so an epistolary paper is one written in the form of a letter. The letter can be written to anyone you wish to discuss a particular work with, the author, a character, another author, a teacher. Write about issues that interest you. You should be creative and may even take a humorous approach in your letter if you wish. We'll talk more about that letter. Humor is sometimes hard to pull off, but I'll help you with that too. The emphasis should be on critical response and interpretation of issues, ideas, actions, or literary techniques that seem important to discuss. Mere summary of a work is not acceptable. All epistolary paper topics will be approved ahead of time by the instructor during a one-on-one conference with the student. In class, we'll do that over Zoom. We'll be able to meet, we'll be able to talk, Zoom or whatever platform we're going to have. I'll let you know about that. I'll set you up. I won't keep you in the dark on anything. Class. Midterm, you're going to have a writing of critical analysis of poetry in relation to its historical and universal context. I'll help you with that. We're going to talk about that. And then class, final essay. During the final exam period, you will write an essay concerning works required during the semester. A selection of writings will be presented ahead of time. The final question or questions will come from the required readings, okay? There we are on page 2. So, then class once again into the calendar of where we are. Now, today is once again the 3rd. We're looking at the calendar here, class, once again, that we move through. So today's the 3rd, it's a Thursday. Friday is going to be the 4th. This is a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday class. But class, a lot of that goes out the window. We'll have our deadline dates that we'll stick to. But since this is once again an online class in the pandemic and there's no scheduled class times officially that we meet, you take care of this on your own. However, we need to be on track with where we are in regards to these readings. So it showed us that the first week, orientation, of course, continue orientation, interviews, etc. Class, so we've gotten that overview. Now we're into this week. So, class, let's just talk about what this week that we're dealing with here and then into next week. So I'm going to start lecturing today on the Romantic period and illuminating that work in our text and talking about it. The importance of the Romantic period in a few minutes. Then, class, after that, make sure that you're into the great William Blake Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, once again, within your textbook. And I'll be helping you with Blake. I'll help you with Blake. You'll help me with Blake. I'm still reading them all the time. And help you, once again, on the importance, the illumination of William Blake and these Romantic poets, which is so important to us. Then class, Songs of Experience, which is scheduled for tomorrow. And then class, we're going to have Labor Day off, and then we're going to move into these readings here next week. Robert Burns, To a Mouse, To a Louse, Tam O'Shanter. All on here on the end pages of the syllabus. Now, in this class, what happens sometimes is we get a little bit behind, and then we get caught up, we get a little bit behind, etc., etc. Now, on this last handout that I published under, once again, memos and messages to you and announcements through Blackboard, dear English 23 students, please stay up with the readings that are assigned on the syllabus. So you keep moving along with those as best as you can. And then once again, I'm going to illuminate those and help you with those. I will lecture on the Romantic period I mentioned. That's what I'm going to do today. Please make sure that tomorrow you're reading once again the entries on the syllabus. I'll be following up the Romantic period with a dive into William Blake, and I hope you stay safe and well. So, class, that's what we're going to do today. So let's talk about the Romantic period here. Let me illuminate these texts for you. We're dealing with the Norton Anthology of Literature. We're on, once again, page 3 that I have highlighted and illuminated in our text. And let's go through this, class. Let's go through this. It tells us that, class, that the Romantic period, though by far the shortest, this is once again in the opening page, is at least as complex and diverse as any other period in British literary history. Complex and diverse. We're going to talk about that, why it is. Fantastic time, once again, in history. 1785 to 1832. So, what's helpful in the study of literature is to be thinking about, too, what you know about that timeline in the world. What you know about that timeline, 1785 to 1832, once again, in regards to what was going on in America, too. In here and where we were in the world. It tells us right here in this Romantic period on the timeline that in 1807, British slave trade outlawed slavery. Abolished throughout the empire of the West Indies, included 26 years later. So we still had a world with slaves then, and they were outlawed in 1807. And then once again, 1832, passage of the Reform Bill in Parliament. So, and it is telling, demarcated differently than any other eras that literary historians and anthologists include in their timelines, once again. So we're dealing with the Romantic period, class. Very good. Britain's ruling elites. Once again, let's see what we got here. As some scholars tell it, the new era began in 1776, the year Americans declared their independence, while others single out 1783 when shattering military defeat at the hands of those Americans dealt a blow to the credibility of Britain's ruling elite. So right then, we know that we're in Britain. We're looking at it through the forming of America. And many settle on 1789, the year that launched the Democrat Revolution in France, ushered in decades of fierce political unrest in Britain in its turn, and laid the ground for a war between Britain and the French Empire and their allies that would envelop an entire generation and take almost the entire globe in its theater. So, class, this is where, once again, what's so beautiful about education, history, politics, illuminating, and once again, echoing and the reverb of history in its relationship to literature. So Britain and France, once again, at each other's throats during these times, in wars. Class. The Romantic is also a period of time, the sole period that is named after a literary form, the Romance, a great scholarly achievement of the later 18th century, have been the recovery from obscurity of the medieval romances previously ignored by literary historians more concerned with classical influences, and the Romantic period witnessed a reevaluation of these wild verse tales of adventure, chivalry, and love. So once again, we're coming back into a time adventure, chivalry, and love, which have been out of play for some decades. Exactly the traits, their barbarous deviations from probability and rationality, their unabashed fictionality, the fantasies they induced in their readers. So once again, the romance, the fantasy for the readers of reading, once again, these romantic tales. Full were seen anew as commentators moved from lauding the room for idealization and visionary imagination that romance had afforded pre-modern writers to proposing that modern literature should follow suit and become, in one sense, more romantic too. All right. So once again, the coming back of chivalry, of romance, of tales being written, of travel, of discovery, of seeking out once again for beauty in these new realities of life during the Romantic time. Very good. The messier option of treating the era as a single entity equips us better to do justice to its complex multiplicity. So there's a lot going on, class, then in history. Multiplicity. In refraining from an attempt to disentangle romance from history and literary from political change, this is on page 4 of our introduction, we can better see how this period, in confronting their entanglement, originated the question about the relationship of art and activism, aesthetics and politics that trouble us still. So once again, art and activism, aesthetics and politics that trouble us still. The same of what we're going on with today. Art and activism. What's happening now with it? A lot in our current time in the United States of America. Once again, politics, how they all, aesthetics, once again. Aesthetics in how the language is being used. Aesthetics in how poetry is being used, class. Once again, aesthetics in how words are being used. Almost like an artist painting. Once again, painting, writing, class, and how that's influenced by, once again, the time, such as back then, the wars going on between France and England, and right now, in our situation, how a lot of literature is influenced by politics, by revolt in some ways, things that we're still grappling with. So, what happened then, once again, and what's happening now. Class. We can better see, too, how the notions of poetic autonomy that were involved in the rehabilitation of romance's extravagance, untrammeled, fictionality, top of the page 5, were likewise forged under the pressure of, once again, political events, and how the reconception of the relation of the present and the past at stake in this recovery of a lost literary tradition often entailed as well imagining a new political future. So once again, what's happening at the time, forging this new literary reality, the politics of the time, the wars of the time, forging a new literary reality. And that, once again, helped form this new political future. So these things aren't happening in a vacuum. Aspects of this we still deal with today, class. The conspicuous presence on the literary scene, which happened during the Romantic period, of a new female literature. Middle of the page, page 5. Sorry, class, got a few allergies, but I'm doing all right. A lot of coughing a little bit during the fall season every year. A new female literature and the poetesses producing it, to use the quaint phraseology of the male reviewers, and the fact more generally that this was the most prolific age of literary production ever seen in European history. So it's a lot of people writing. It's a lot of people, once again, in literary production, attracted much commentary and some lament. So commentary on what was happening, how it was new, and sometimes lament, which happens in all periods of history for the way things were. But class, the things can never remain the way things were. Things are always changing, once again, always changing, always moving forward, once again, in literature, much like with us right here now, with this online class. No matter what happens, we're in this new reality that we're in, and a new literary reality in some ways in our period of this crisis, this pandemic that happened to us. The flu, the Asian flu, or whatever people call it. Okay. And now we see now that there's hope. Hope coming. Hope coming. Maybe someday we won't have to wear masks all the time. Hope coming that there'll be a vaccine. I've been following that nonstop. And that we'll be able to get through this pandemic and then move on. We're always moving forward. Never go backwards, class. In literature, in life, in politics, in history. Forward. Always forward, never backwards, class. I had a friend who used to tell me, man, I knew when I first moved to town, I was about 20 years older than me, he used to say, and he's a Vietnam veteran and a professor, he'd say, Larry, the wheel is going to turn. No matter what happens, the wheel is going to turn. It's going to keep turning. Are you going to turn with the wheel? Or is the wheel going to run over you? And I'm like, I don't have any choice. Got to go forward, class. Forward, forward, forward. Fact more generally that this was the most prolific age of literary production, the Romantic period, even seen in European history, attracted much commentary and some lamenting of the past. The learned lady, or blue stocking, one critic complained in 1823, is a creature of modern growth and capable of existing only in such times as the present. So women, literarily, were making progress. And once again, the progress of the time of the Romantic period, where a lot was happening, a lot was being produced. They were producing it too. Then class, it talks in here about revolution and reaction. The early period of the French Revolution, I always think of 1789 to 1795. I remember that from the community college class. God, and it's here in the dates, but it comes back to me. I remember when I was in the community college in Los Angeles at El Camino, I was on fire trying to connect literary to history, literature to history, to politics, to art, because I knew that they all went together and one was starting to illuminate the other. And I remember being in an early history class where we studied the French Revolution. And we got tested on dates. And I remember 1789, 1795, the French Revolution. community college and remembering those details now, all these years later, decades later, and how the community college changed my entire life and how it'll change yours too, class. How it'll change yours too, El Paso Community College. A great place to start and continue that search for knowledge, class. The early period of the French Revolution, 1789 to 1795, when it ended, marked the declaration of the rights of man, and the storming of the Bastille invoked enthusiastic support from English liberals and radicals alike. Three important books epitomized the radical social thinking stimulated by the revolution: Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication for the Rights of Man, fantastic read. Justified the Revolution against Edmund Burke's attack in the Reflections on the Revolution in France, and Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, 1791-1792, also advocated for England a democratic republic that was to be achieved as lesser pressures failed, class, once again. Excellent. So, we see the moving on in the Romantic period. We see the continuation of history. We see the longing once again for romance and chivalry. We'll see the longing, we're going to see it soon, that longing for essence that'll go beyond things like the Industrial Revolution, which will be happening in machines, and people longing for romance, people longing for poets, longing for nature, the true essence that even today can be captured, or the poet can capture in nature, or be filled with nature once again. Even in a place like, or more maybe importantly, in a place like El Paso. Say, for example, the romance for El Paso, the romance for the desert, how the desert once again can be. We know it's a harsh place. We know it's a hot place, but how also it can be a place for romance, class, and a place for rejuvenation, and a place for revitalization in the sun, in the desert, in the transformative power of the heat. Class. Now, once again, French Revolution, the guillotining of thousands, the brutalness of us, the reign of terror that you may have studied about in your other classes under Robespierre, and after the execution in their turn of the men who had directed the terror, the emergence of Napoleon. First as dictator, then as Emperor of France, as Wordsworth wrote in the prelude, and we're going to study William Wordsworth. We're going to get into him. The great English poet, class, who still reverberates today with us. We still read Wordsworth. We need Wordsworth. We need him now maybe more than ever. And we will look into him. And we'll dive into his work. In the prelude, he said, they became oppressors in their turn. Frenchmen had changed a war of self-defense for one of conquest, losing sight of all which they had struggled for. Napoleon, the brilliant once again leader, whose rise through the ranks of the army had seemed to epitomize the egalitarian principles of the revolution, had become an arch aggressor, a despot, and would be founder of a new imperial dynasty after the French Revolution, class. By 1800, so we're moving along in time, liberals found they had no side they could wholeheartedly espouse. Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815 proved to be the triumph, not of progress, and reform, not of progress and reform, but of reactionary despotisms throughout continental Europe. In that year, accordingly, the deluge and the debates about the legitimacy of the ruling class, about patrician degeneracy that figures such as in Godwin's Pain and in Wollstonecraft had launched in the 1790s, returned with once again a vengeance. From start to finish, this was a period of harsh, repressive measures. Public meetings were prohibited in 1795. The right of habeas corpus, the legal principle protecting individuals from arbitrary imprisonment, was suspended for the first time in over 100 years. And advocates of even moderate political change were charged with, once again, treason. So, class, a time of despots, a time of after the revolution, a time of harshness, which would set people once again in this mode of looking for romance, eventually looking for nature, looking for essences of which I often talk about in later poetic classes, and we'll be dealing with in the Romantic period. What is man? What is woman? What does it mean to be alive? Why is a person put here on earth? Once again, these are those universal items that we talked about, universal context. What does it mean to be happy? Can men and women find happiness? How will one find happiness? Is there a God? How important it is to know God? Is there Jesus? Is there the saints? Are there spirits? Once again, why are we put here on this earth? Okay, they're grappling with these in the Romantic period. What is our place? Why are we here? Things that you will be grappling with as young men and women. You may have already. Some of you may have woken up at night and asked yourself, why am I here? Why am I at the community college class? Why am I at the community? Why am I here? Why am I even thinking about going to the community college? What is going to be my purpose in life? What do I want out of life? Of course, my hope for you, what I want for you to be in life is educated young men and women. So once again, one of the beautiful things about education is, so when you go to a party years from now, or even now, or you're hanging out with friends, you could talk about aspects of the Romantic period. You can see how it affects you. You can talk about politics. You can talk about literature. You can talk about culture. You can talk about current events. You can talk about old music. You can talk about new music. You can talk about rappers. Class. You can talk about language. You can engage in language once again. Why are we put here? Why are you here? Once again. The great Los Angeles poet and writer Charles Bukowski, which a lot of times young people will come up to me and say, hey, Mr. Welch, I'm reading Bukowski. What do you think of that? And I'll be like, cool. Bukowski was once again the Los Angeles street poet. And he reverberates still with a lot of people. But anyway, the reason I bring him up is one time in a job interview, and he was most probably by that time in his 30s. A job interviewer asked him, and he wrote about this in his life. They asked him, who are you and what do you want to be? He's in his 30s. He said the correct answer to that is, who am I? I don't know. I don't know, but I'm trying to find out. So that's for you at the community college. I don't know, but you're trying to find out, and that's all right. Okay, what do you want to be? Who are you? I don't know yet, but I'm trying to find out. They'd ask him, well, what do you want to be? He said, I don't know what I want to be, but I know, and this was for him, I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a cop. I don't want to be a mathematician. For him, I think I want to be a writer. Even though it's a hard life and maybe not making much money and the struggle, but I want to, I think, be a writer. Charles Bukowski, Black Sparrow Press, the legendary Los Angeles sewer poet. Who are you? I don't know. Who are you? I don't know. But I'm trying to find out. Same for me. Who am I? I think I kind of know. Even though I'm kind of at the tail end of the whole journey. I'm hoping the journey will go a lot further. But still, class, just like you, I don't fully know. I'm still discovering it. Like we do continue to discover by what? Diving into literature. The more we're looking right now, you and I, at the Romantic period, it helps us to learn about ourselves. Ourselves, the Romantic poets class. Very good. So, the journey continues. In the 1780s, 1790s, numerous writers attacked the greed of the owners of the West Indian sugar plantations and detailed the horrors of the traffic in African flesh that provided them with their labor power. But the bloodshed that accomplished political change in France strengthened the hand of apologists for slavery by making any manner of reform seem the prelude to a violent insurrection. Parliament rejected a bill abolishing the trade in 1791, and 16 years marked by slave rebellions and by the planters' brutal reprisals elapsed before it passed into a new version of the bill. Okay. The frustration of the abolitionist cause to get rid of slavery is an emblematic chapter in the larger story of how a reactionary government sacrificed hopes of reform while it mobilized the nation's resources for war. Yet, this was the very time, page 7, when economic and social changes were creating a desperate need for corresponding changes in political arrangements. For one thing, new classes inside of England, manufacturing rather than agriculture, were beginning to demand a voice in government proportionate to their wealth. The Industrial Revolution class, which I earlier talked about, the shift in manufacturing that resulted from the invention of power-driven machinery to replace hard labor, had begun in the mid-18th century with improvements in machines for processing textiles and was given immense impetus when James Watt perfected the steam engine. So class, yeah, we're coming into the Industrial Revolution, where once again in England too, what we're going to see is no labor laws, people working too much, kids once again working too much, machines taking over once again, and that grasping for what, for that and progress, but also looking to the romance in some ways of a time, an agrarian time, an earlier time too, where agriculture was mainly the scene. And the machines hadn't, you know, revolutionized so many things. And what would come, of course, with that industrial revolution, we'll talk about this next time. What would come with that industrial revolution is pain, right? So, one thing about in any of these periods of history that we go through and in literature, there's once again in the grasping for essence, the grasping for beauty, the grasping for transcendence, the grasping for some for a God consciousness, the grasping for spirit. And then of course there'll be that grasping and the creeping in of pain, challenges, of aspects of hell. Okay. All things class, once again, that is with us today. That is with us today. So, the Romantic period. And so, to wrap up, we will start seeing how there was this longing for romance. There's this longing for chivalry. There's this longing for nature. There's this longing for innocence that may be taken away from the Industrial Revolution. There's this longing for love. There's maybe this longing for transcendence. There's also, we'll see this longing for spirit, possibly outside of spirituality found in nature, and maybe outside the confines of what the Church of England or the Catholic Church class. All ahead of us, once again, in English 2323, the Romantic period. So, class, that is where we are. And we have the Labor Day coming up. So I want you to continue your readings. Next time we are going to dive into a little more history of the Romantic period. I think I've given you a good overview, but there's still more overview that we need to set for the semester. And we will be talking about some of the new poetries and practices and theories next time I lecture. So it's taken me a little bit to get through this, but we will, because it's very, very important. Concepts of the poet and the poem class. Once again, spontaneity and the impulses of feeling class. Once again. And then we're going to be moving right into class. We will move right into, we'll have set such an incredible basis, which we are right now. We'll be moving into William Blake, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. So, do those readings for next week. Make sure you've digested those. Digested the Romantic period reading, 3 to 30. And then class after that next week. We'll try and get caught up next week with Blake, Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. And then we will move into, certainly after that, the great once again, Scottish poet Robert Burns. Okay. And then we'll move in after that to Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication for the Rights of Women. Then we'll be lucky enough that we'll get to move into Wordsworth. Okay. William Wordsworth and Coleridge. Also important to us. And then throughout the semester, we'll be moving on and on and on. And we'll be lucky enough that we'll get to move into the great Lord Byron. Okay. So stay loose with your readings. When you do your readings as you're continuing, you're dealing with Blake, you're moving towards Robert Burns' class. Once again, be thinking about what we dealt with today. Be thinking about my lecture. Be thinking about Romanticism. Let it fill you up as you continue this journey. With that said, class, I'm wishing you a great Labor Day, okay, on Monday. And certainly by next week, I'll have some more lectures that you can access. We're going to lecture once again in regards to what I just talked about in the Romantic period, and then right into William Blake. So class, once again, I'm happy that you're here. Remember what a powerful time this is in your life. What a great time it is to be diving into literature. What a great time it is to be in the Romantic period. And with that said, class, I'm hoping you stay safe and well. And once again, have a great weekend and be good and kind to yourself. And we'll see you during the next lecture. Thank you.